since what, 3, 4? And when I was 3 or 4, our internet was a set of encyclopedias. How about, how many of y'all watch television? Good. Plenty of shows? Cable TV? 100 channels of absolutely nothing to watch? Yeah. When we were growing up, color television was the next big thing. And if we were lucky, we had 4 channels to watch. We had ABC, CBS, NBC, and if we were lucky enough to live close enough to the local PBS station, we could get PBS also. And watching television was the only thing to do once the sun went down and homework was done, and we already eat dinner, but then right before bedtime. And being the youngest of 6 children, I had little choice of what I got to watch. When our father was home, nobody got a choice. The Encyclopedia Britannica tells that during the Vietnam era, watching television was seen as a form of escapism. People watched more for entertainment than they did for information. If they wanted to read about the war, they would watch the news. During the 1960s, there were a potpourri of shows that dominated the airwaves. Airwaves are what us old folks call broadcast television signal. There were shows that gave you feel-good moments, such as variety shows or moral-telling stories like westerns, crime dramas, situation comedies, or even animal shows, and a plethora of other TV shows. But none of these shows ever mentioned the war. That is, of course, the news. And the news was full of information on the war. On a nightly basis, you could find out body count statistics and see pictures of soldiers in their bloody uniforms. Fairly traumatic stuff for a preteen growing up to absorb. Now let's just take a step back a moment. I need you to know who I am. During my upbringing, my grandfather was a merchant marine during World War II. Right after high school in 1944, my uncle joined the Navy and went and fought in World War II. And my father was in the Army as part of the medical corps stationed in Germany after World War II. So I was brought up with a sense of patriotism. Not gung-ho, but pro-American. And being a student at Pensacola Christian School for 8 years meant that I and the rest of my class said the Pledge of Allegiance every day. No big deal, just the American thing to do. That being said, the television was definitely an escape, a way to fantasize about an ideal life. I was the youngest of 6 kids, almost a Brady Bunch. That meant that I was at the mercy of my siblings as to what we were going to watch on TV. But no matter what we watched, the only mention of Vietnam was on the news. Or that is until Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Now this was a fun show that I didn't quite get all the grown-up jokes, but I did understand some things. I took notice when the show poked fun at the establishment, which is what our generation called the government. And this is when I started to ask the question, why? Why are we poking fun at government? Why, we as American citizens, aren't we supposed to support the government? Well, I believe this is when I started to ask why the news was showing the violence of the Vietnam War and the violence of protesting the war to get it to stop. Now, that's not what we wanted to watch. Yeah, we never really said, hey, let's go watch the news about Vietnam, but it was kind of a big deal. Especially when, according to the National Public Radio website, NPR.org, Walter Cronkite stated, "To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe in the face of the evidence the optimists who have been wrong in the past. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then would be to negotiate not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best that they could." Now, for those of you who don't know, Walter Cronkite was a news anchorman and reporter for CBS since World War II through the 1980s. At one point, he was, a poll stated that he was the most trusted man in America. And he had made a trip to Vietnam and after one of the operations famously known as the Tet Offensive. And he came back and gave his commentary. So when Walter Cronkite said that the war was unwinnable, it seems like the whole country, including then President Johnson, who decided not to run for re-election in 1968, believed him. Story goes that once President Johnson saw Walter Cronkite's commentary, he turned to his press secretary, George Christian, and said, "If I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." But this has not stopped the news from reporting the war. Not at all. It seems like the older I got, the more violent the stories were and the shows were becoming. By this time, more shows on television like Laugh-In were mentioning not the war, not by naming it directly, and also the anti-war sentiment and protests. And it seems like it just got worse for this child of the 60s. Two prominent people were killed, Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And the news kept getting more violent. I can't remember a time before the end of the Vietnam War there wasn't something horrible in the news that had to show. Even the 1968 National Democratic Convention in Chicago wasn't immune to this turbulent time. And it all seemed to come to a boiling point on March 7, 1970. This point, a peaceful march by anti-war protests on Kent State University, which led students to go up against the Ohio State National Guard. It turned violent, leading to the deaths of 4 of these students. The story in of itself seemed to me that that's when the American people decided that it was time for the war to end. I mean, when bands like Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, who released the song Ohio about the incident, and the radio stations my brothers listened to played it over and over several times a day, it must mean something. Even Richard Nixon, who is mentioned by name in the song, ran his 1972 presidential campaign on to coming to the end of the war, and he won by a landslide. Now, I asked a gentleman where I work, one of our longtime customers, Mr. Wayne Leonhardt, what the sentiment was amongst the armed forces where he was during the war. Now, he had stated that there were several thousand servicemen, and wherever he went during his 3 tours of duty, the feeling was pretty much mutual. They were there, they were going to do a job that needed to be done, and they were willing to do it. They weren't for it, they weren't against it, it was just a job that needed to be done. They did the best they could in the situation they were given. Sure, they heard about all the anti-war protests, but they just figured everybody was entitled to their opinion. Their job was to fight the war, and they did the best that they could. There was no subversive action being taken, it was just go in, do the job, and come home. But it was something that needed to be done, and they were willing, not excited, but willing to do. Now, you may be wondering how a preteen knew so much about the goings-on during the Vietnam War. Well, during the Saturday morning cartoons between Bugs Bunny and Scooby-Doo, CBS ran a little news snippets called In the News. That explained current events to a child's level, and I could understand it. So I knew about the draft, I knew about the protests. I knew the people who went to Vietnam and died. I knew I had brothers who were coming of age to be drafted. I knew I didn't want them to die. Even though I was American and supported America, I wanted the war to end, one way or the other. By the time our last troops were coming out of Vietnam in 1975, I was turning 13. I was forging my own thoughts about our government and my own distrust of big government and the control that they wanted to keep over our lives. If you ask my daughter, who happens to be in the audience, she would tell you that we ourselves have never received government assistance for anything until, ironically, we applied for FAFSA for her and I to go to school here at PSC. I don't like big government. I don't like the thought of Big Brother is watching you. And my politics reflects it. I always vote to reduce big government. I only vote for new taxes for schools, fire departments, and law enforcement because we pay enough in taxes already to support all these programs that are necessary. I just wish the world couldn't depend upon us for everything.